This is Japan Travel Smart. My name's Johnny, and I hope you join me to discover a better Japan travel experience. Welcome back to Japan Travel Smart. This is your travel companion Johnny, and this is journey number 15. How to fly to Japan for cheap. Japan Travel Smart is a bi-weekly podcast all about the joy of travel through Japan, far and wide, from the perspective of a frequent visitor who just can't get enough of the place that does it best. This is your one-stop shop for the very best of Japan travel, including novel advice and Japan-specific tips to keep you ahead of the game. We cater to first-time and repeat Japan visitors alike in hopes of making the country shine at its very best regardless of interest, budget, or time of year. One could say that a trip to Japan doesn't actually become real until your flights have been booked. The question is, how much of a dent on your trip budget will those flights be making? The prospect of visiting Japan without having to spend as much as you'd expect from flights is sure to be intriguing, especially for those of you coming in long haul from Western countries. For many of you, Japan may be one of the furthest places in the world you could go to. Japan and Asia at large may certainly feel prohibitive as you consider the fact of transcontinental travel or the sheer number of flying hours. The assumption that it's going to be expensive and time-consuming effectively dissuades so many people from seriously considering a Japan trip, even if they'd really like to go. Well, there's really not much that we can do about the time and inconvenience to actually get to Japan. What can be done about the cost to fly to Japan, though? It turns out that there are many steps that you can take to find a better deal. We've decided to compile all of the ones that we know and have put into practice over our years of Japan travel. And as a result, in this episode of Japan Travel Smart, we are going to pull out every trick in the book to get us cheap fares for reaching Japan. Before we continue, let's be sure to set expectations. There's no silver bullet for you to find here. The thing that you should definitely realize now is that there isn't any easy shortcut to airfare that's much better than what you'd expect or what you're accustomed to. Is it worth it to make such an effort for low airfare? That's up to you to decide. Scoring better deals on your flights to Japan means more of your travel budget for Japan itself and more frequent visits if that's your thing. On the other hand, there's usually big trade-offs for flying on a low fare, which include your time and personal comfort. Nevertheless, there's also some really simple steps you can take to reduce the airfare you pay that you might not have considered at all. That's why we're dividing today's tips into two sections. One with basic tips, and one with the advanced course. Let's start with some of the basics that are always useful to keep in mind. When most travelers think about what they can do to fly to Japan without breaking the bank, they will probably consider booking with good anticipation to their trips, and perhaps to avoid travel on certain times of year. We'll have to ask, though, what is the single most important factor in being able to fly for cheap? The number one and number two aspects to achieve it are definitely flexibility in your flight dates and willingness to lay over. In this case, it's going to be really important that the dates that you fly out and return from your trip aren't set in stone. For those of you who are given your holidays on tight dates without the ability to set your own time off, you may be out of luck in this regard. Setting flexibility on your flying dates will allow you to evade any high fare dates, and you can also find a deal most any time of year. So feel free to decide on your season or month of travel with your tentative dates. Pull up your preferred flight booking search service and start using features like calendar fare display to check for meaningful differences on your range of dates of travel to Japan. Honestly, the more flexible you are, the better. Casting a wide net will grant the best results, and in the case of longer stays in Japan, that includes the possibility of extending or shortening your planned trip by a few days as you home in on a good fare. As for flying direct to Japan, even though not all of us are able to take non-stop flights to Japan from our home airport, flying non-stop from a Western city cuts your options down to just a couple alternatives in most cases. So naturally, wanting to fly non-stop is most likely not conducive to finding the most discounted fare. If we are prioritizing a better deal to fly to Japan, we'll have to be very open to booking flights with layovers. And in fact, this is the second of the two most important factors to a low airfare for Japan. Having to connect somewhere is going to be a fact of life for a deal hunter, unless you are already flying out of a mega hub with many flights to Japan, such as from Los Angeles International Airport in North America. And for the purpose of this discussion, you will want to be very airline agnostic when booking flights and always be willing to try a different carrier. Because from experience, a different airline is going to inevitably offer you the best deal at any given time. This is advice best designed for flyers who aren't already attached to any loyalty program or that aren't playing an involved points game. What times of year should you rule out if you are trying to avoid high airfare to Japan? Generally speaking, there are 2 times of year where you would easily expect to see higher airfare. The first is during the summer in the Northern Hemisphere, especially the peak of summer break travel. The other is at the start of winter holidays, particularly at the end of year and New Year's. We have taken note that the time of year where it's consistently more expensive to fly to Japan, and most anywhere else for that matter, is the 2 or 3 week period that make up the winter holidays and New Year's, which is the time of year during which many people are afforded a break. Are there also other times of year which are believed to be more expensive to travel to Japan? What about cherry blossom season? The cherry blossom bloom period, which is traditionally expected between the end of March and start of April, is an extremely popular period to visit Japan specifically. However, we find that it's not necessarily a more expensive period to visit from the West. This makes sense because regardless of how you route yourself to Japan, it's not like everyone traveling is heading there with you. On the other hand, traveling during summer break or winter holidays means you are trying to book plane seats, which are always limited, during a much more competitive time of year where most people are able and willing to travel and going basically everywhere. Another time of year where some people might expect high airfare is during Golden Week in Japan. But from what we've observed, it's actually a relatively quiet time of year where deals can definitely be found on international flights to Japan. However, you may still want to avoid being in Japan during Golden Week for other reasons. Golden Week is a Japanese holiday period that falls in early May, and it's an extremely busy domestic travel period as most Japanese people get time off. You should expect things like hotels and transportation to be heavily booked and attractions to be busy. And that may actually be kind of a nightmare. Japan can already be a pretty hectic place when you're visiting popular attractions or wanting to catch cherry blossoms or seasonal events like autumn leaves, without everyone in the country having time off all at the same time. So, in summary, we know that we can fly to Japan, finding a good deal at almost any time of year, as long as we have flexibility in our travel dates and a willingness to connect rather than flying non-stop. How far in advance should you book your flight to Japan? We know for sure that there is such a thing as booking your flights too soon before the trip to be able to score a good deal. This is because most of the traveling public seem to book flights without that much anticipation to travel. Also, if we assume that we are flying long haul to get to Japan, from experience, we expect to have much less wiggle room for booking on short notice compared to flying short haul or domestic. From what we've observed, average airfare on long haul starts to inevitably creep up from the 2-month mark before departure. Actually, we also want to avoid booking flights too far in advance. Flights don't launch being sold at the best price you can book them at. Launch fares are speculative and are expected to eventually go down when the flight isn't selling as well. Those are the flights that we are interested in finding. From our personal experience, we want to book our long-haul flights to Japan at around the 2 to 4 month mark before the day of departure. We believe that around the 4-month mark is when pressure to fill up seats causes booking systems to ramp up the discounts where applicable. On the other hand, you should probably have your long-haul Japan flights booked by the 2-month mark, since most of the traveling public will start to book around that time, and that's the thing that causes airfare to rise from its lowest point. This actually brings us to our next piece of basic advice for scoring good airfare, which is to try to start tracking fares for your preferred dates early and to be patient. Use your favorite flight tracker website and learn to use the tracking tools at your disposal. Get a feel for what fares look like at any time of year, and keep checking back on the tracker for your preferred dates. These days, anyone has access to perfect pricing information, and we're all using the same tools for looking up fares. The difference is that you would have more flexibility and much more patience to scope out all of your available options over time. This is the actual way that you're going to find an awesome deal for you. So even though there's not much more to say on flight tracking, tracking fares is really important. You need to have an idea of what a fare to Japan usually looks like and how they trend over time, so that you can then determine what a good deal looks like. We also find it really useful to utilize more than one flight booking website to look up and track the fares. With this, we have our basic tips covered for low airfare to Japan. Now we're ready to move on to our advanced course, for those of you who are really determined to uncover the lowest cost of flying to Japan. The first trick we want to talk about in this advanced category is the practice of booking positioning flights to build your own connections. In the previous section, we stressed the importance of being willing to lay over and take connecting flights to reach Japan. But positioning yourself to Japan is taking this whole concept one step further. You see, when you go on a flight booking website and you input a departure from your home airport and an arrival in Japan, like you'd normally do, your search results are curated in a way that it may not necessarily find the lowest possible fare. Most flight search engines aren't willing to build an itinerary for you by connecting low-cost service to full-service carriers, or even by connecting you on 2 different legacy carriers on the same itinerary. The idea of making your itinerary by booking a positioning flight involves making sure to first fly yourself to a big airport hub, from where you can book cheaper flights to Japan. You'll very likely be able to build yourself a lower fare in this way, compared to running fare searches direct from your home airport. If you're in North America, for example, One really good airport to position yourself to go to Japan is Los Angeles International. So basically, what this comes down to is booking yourself a round trip to a hub airport with many Japan flights, from where you book yourself on a different ticket to Japan. Naturally, there is a risk to building your itinerary with positioning flights because you have to make your own connection and count on not having a serious delay or cancellation that prevents you from reaching your connecting airport. Remember, you won't be traveling on a single ticket where you may be rescheduled for missed connections. In the case of positioning yourself, you will always want to set up a long layover for yourself to cover for delays. And make sure your travel insurance covers a missed connection or a cancellation in this scenario. Next up, we'll bring attention to the idea of traveling light for a lower fare. Being willing to travel to Japan with just a carry-on may just help you find the discount ticket that you're looking for. Even for long-distance flights, airline travel these days is becoming more and more unbundled. You shouldn't have to pay for service that you don't use on your airline ticket. And that's why you should be able to purchase a fare that doesn't offer checked baggage allowance if you're able to only travel with a carry-on. For this same reason, you may also want to look into flying to Japan on a long-haul, low-cost carrier. In this scenario, you will be unbundling your baggage and any meal service by default, and you will be adding on weight allowance, checked bags, and in-flight meals as you see necessary. Keep in mind that when flying low cost, carry-on weight allowance will be very low, and you should expect to add on the ancillary fee for your carry-on. There's also going to be no in-flight entertainment on board, so you will want to be sure to bring your own entertainment on such flights. Other than that, the flying experience will be the same as traveling economy on standard airlines. There still don't exist many options for flying to Japan from a Western country with a low-cost carrier, but it's definitely something to consider when available to you and when the fares are low enough to completely outdo the standard alternatives. Currently, low-cost long-haul flights to Japan are available from select cities in the US and Canada, and the airline in question is actually a low-cost subsidiary of a famous major Japanese carrier. Speaking of Japanese carriers, you may want to be on the lookout for their promotions for international visitors, such as a recent campaign offering the ability to add a free domestic flight to your booked flights to Japan. Of course, we should mention that Japanese carriers rank among the top airlines in the world for service and amenities, and we certainly do love to fly in the Japanese airlines. So even if you're on a tight budget, scoring a deal like that can offset the expected premium to fly a Japanese carrier if you were looking to also catch a domestic flight during your visit to Japan. Another idea that can save you money in a different way is by booking an open-jaw flight on your trip to Japan. Open jaw refers to the practice of booking an itinerary so that you fly into one city at your destination and fly out of an entirely different city when you leave. So, for instance, you fly into Tokyo on one ticket and fly out of Osaka on a return home ticket. The idea is that you wouldn't need to return to Tokyo just to fly back home, or alternatively, that you'll be making a Tokyo leg as part of your ticket to fly back home from Osaka, if that can save you money. It may be really tricky to make an open-jaw flight also be the best deal you can find, but we've managed to pull it off in the past. We booked a flight back home from Osaka instead of Tokyo, which routed us back to Tokyo on the first leg, but the ticket was no more expensive than what it would have been if we just booked out of Tokyo. So in this way, we scored a free flight back to Tokyo. Again, just to be clear, open-jaw flying usually requires you to book a one-way ticket into Japan and a separate one-way ticket to leave Japan from a different city. In a situation like this, you want to be sure to provide printed proof of your return flights in case it's requested upon entry to Japan. We have another piece of advice that those of you visiting Japan from Europe and the rest of the old world might want to consider. Visitors from Europe and thereabouts will be coming to Japan from the West, so you may find yourself willing to connect somewhere in East Asia on a good deal to visit Japan. In a case like that, in addition to looking at flights to Tokyo or Osaka, you may also want to consider looking up fares to fly into second-tier airports in Japan. East Asia is very well connected to Japan with international flights to all sorts of regional airports, including many low-cost flights available from places like Korea or Taiwan. We've had luck searching and finding great fares to visit Japan by considering the following airports: Chubu Centrair International Airport in Nagoya, Fukuoka Airport, Hiroshima Airport, Mount Fuji Shizuoka Airport, and Komatsu Airport in Ishikawa. So you might want to give those destinations a try if you're unable to find the deal you're expecting flying into Tokyo or Osaka. And look, as long as you're able to get yourself to land somewhere in Japan that's a really good deal, you can easily work out a travel plan that fulfills what you intended to do. And this is something we've pulled off before. It shouldn't matter as much where you arrive or depart in Japan when everything is so well connected, and it'll be easy enough to get around once you're there. And if none of the recommendations that we've provided so far really do it for you, we actually have one more piece of advice to pretty much guarantee a cheap plane ticket to Japan. You could travel during a massive pandemic event, or in the aftermath of a large-scale natural disaster, or in the midst of a hard-hitting economic depression. Okay, we hope you realize that we're being a bit tongue-in-cheek with this one. Not to be completely crass about it, but it is kind of true that there's opportunity in the midst of uncertainty. We were traveling to Japan on business while the country was still restricted to open tourism due to the pandemic. And during those times, we were taking notice of the lowest fares we'd ever seen. Of course, there were many other things that made travel during that time really inconvenient. There was paperwork, vaccine cards, PCR tests, extra processing time at immigration. Honestly, it's kind of hard to recommend. With all this in mind, we want to be sure to tell our listeners to please always consider travel guidance and follow special requirements from the relevant authorities, and closely monitor your travel advisories and travel updates. And that's it. Those are all the things we could think of, and that we've actually put into practice for the average traveler on a budget to be able to save money on flights to Japan. We think the big takeaway here is that there are some really easy steps that most people can definitely implement to lessen the pressure on that airline fare, especially with the idea of having flexibility on your travel dates. A lot of you should already know about this because online flight search services and the tools found there make it pretty obvious. Well, in addition to that, we hope to have shown that there's also some really out-of-the-box thinking you can do to score the fare, such as flying into a regional airport in Japan. It is entirely up to you how deep in the rabbit hole you want to go. So happy booking and happy flying. If you're still listening, that means that you made it to the end of another episode of this show. Congratulations! We do realize that this has been another one of those really nerdy episodes. So what do you guys think? Should we tone it down a bit? What should we actually be focused on for a Japan travel podcast? Let us know your thoughts by writing to us at japantravelsmart@gmail.com. Any feedback will be appreciated. My name's Johnny, and I'm signing off with your reminder to, above all, be smart. And everything else will fall in place.